Hello there, Latin 1. This is the very beginning of you taking Latin. If you're watching this digitally, it means that things have gone seriously off the rails, and this is not how I had intended it. But this is, as many people say, the diet version of stuff, so it's the second best. We are using Ecce Romani, so you'll want to make sure that you're using that book. And I'm going to just take you through the beginnings of the book so that you can understand how best to navigate it. So when we get to the introduction, I strongly recommend you read that introduction. It's got interesting information, just kind of gives you some background about Italy. Someday maybe you'll get to go there with me, and what a family is like and where they start the story. They start in a place called Baiae, and then they work their way up to Rome. And then there's a wonderful little discussion, and it's just a very brief discussion about the actual Roman language, which is a lot of fun, and it tells you kind of how it blends in with a lot of things that we know. Then there's a couple of maps, which are a lot of fun, and then we get to page 3. And so on page 3, there's some things that I want you to know about. Sorry, my dog is walking around, and I'm wondering why. He's old. But you get to page 3, and you see the first part of our story, the introduction to the Cornelius family. And there's some things that I'd like to point out to you before we even get into translation or grammar or anything like that, so that when we hit the ground, we will hit it running. So if you take a look at the top of the page, okay, it tells you the chapter you're in, it tells you the title, and so anytime I say, okay, turn to chapter 1 or 3 or 15, it's just the story is what we're talking about. So when I say translate 15, translate 1, that'll mean to just translate that paragraph. Now, some things you need to notice. Number 1, you see that there's a blue 5 there, and if you notice why, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines down. Every 5 lines, they will number it for you, okay? So if you want to very lightly in pencil, you could number 1 through 4 right there as you wish, or you can just count 5 every time. The reason why this is important is, if you look at your glossary, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the glossary tells you what words mean that are up there in the order that they appear on the line number they appear on, okay? Now, it won't do all of them because they do expect you to know some stuff. For instance, the word pictura looks a lot like picture, so you can kind of just figure that out. But the first word you run into is on line 1. It's ecce. It tells you what that means. And then the next word you run into that they want you to figure out, because you could probably figure out what in means, and pictura you can figure out, and est you can probably intuit it. And if not, don't worry, I'll translate for you. But then the word puella shows up, and it tells you what it means. And that's the second word that you run into on line 1 that they want to tell you about. And then nomine, and then quae, and then habitat. The first time habitat shows up is on line 2. Now, it also shows up on line 3, but they don't give it to you in the glossary for line 3 because they already gave it to you in line 1. So the first time that a word appears, it will be linked to that number in the glossary, and that's the line that you can go back and find it on. So if you run into it later and you're like, oh, I don't remember what habitat means down here on line 5, you know what? Check your glossary. Check to see, oh, back on line 1, I remember that now. Or I'm sorry, line 2, I remember that now. And that's basically how it works. So the bold words are the Latin words, and then the italics are the meanings. I will actually kind of course correct as we go, because me being the Latin teacher, there are some words that I disagree with their translations of here in the book. So there will be a chapter where I translate for you. There will be a chapter where I go over the vocabulary for you. There will be places where I give you assignments and stuff like that. So that's, and there will be chapters where I give you, what do we call that? The grammar lessons, okay? So that's kind of how it works. And by chapter, I mean videos, okay? So you'll probably get 2 to 4 videos per chapter that we do. So yeah, that's basically how to read it. And then if you take a look on the next page, they give you some sort of grammar information and kind of the lesson for the day, as it were, and then some exercises to do. And you'll see exercise 1B, exercise 1C, and stuff like that. And that's essentially how it works. Now, if for some reason you decide to buy the workbook, that's awesome. But I will always call it workbook 1A, 1B, 1C. I'll always call it workbook for whatever that is. And that's really good extra enrichment, and if we meet in person, I'll give you copies of things so that you will have that to work on. And a lot of people end up flip-flopping them, so if you see a WB it means it's a ditto sheet that came out of a workbook. If you just see do exercise 1B, it came out of the book. Okay? So that's basically it. I hope that makes sense to you. I look forward to going over the vocab with you and going over the grammar with you in the next few videos, and then finally reading out loud, and so that you get a feel for how it sounds, and then I'll say and then you say and stuff like that. So you'll have to hit pause a bunch of times so that you get used to it. The wonderful thing about these videos is you can keep going back to them. All right, I'm going to hit the button.